Perfect. All right. Again, welcome everybody. This is content heavy, but I'm really excited about all that we're going to share today. So first things first, hi, I'm Bridget. If you don't know me, I am a certified coach focused on walking people through their grief journeys. I hold a BA in psychology, and I'm certified in individual crisis response, diversity and inclusion, and leadership as well. So a little bit of background. In 2013, I lost my father, and I lost my younger brother 11 years later in 2024. And both of these were very unexpected losses. And I felt really alone in my grief process, especially after my dad died. I felt like I had to just figure it out all by myself. And I don't think that's fair, which is why I feel called to do this work now. I walk with people through their grief journeys so that they know that they're not alone. And I'm really grateful that you're here. I'm sorry for your loss, whatever you're experiencing in this moment. And it's really an honor to kind of hold that space with you right now. So, in this free webinar, I am going to give you the best of what I have learned and what I teach my one-on-one clients because I don't think that this information should be gatekept or hidden behind a paywall. I really do believe that everyone should have equitable access to tools and support during their grieving process. So, let's move on to a little bit of housekeeping. So, I want to make sure that everyone knows that in this container right here, you have permission to feel. Talking about grief and loss is really hard. So any and all feelings that might bubble up here are completely valid. And this is a webinar, I can't see or hear any of y'all. So if that means that you need to snuggle up under your weighted blanket with some snacks, please feel free to do that. Give yourself what you need in this moment. Um, all attendees are going to receive a follow-up email with this recording and also links to the sources that I cite in case you want to dive in a little bit deeper with that. And then if you have any questions that come up along the way, feel free to drop them in the chat. Again, we're in webinar mode, so I can't see or hear anyone, but I will be checking the chat periodically. So before we get started, I would like to invite everyone to just take one conscious breath with me so that we can all land here in this moment. We're just going to set aside the day thus far and, make sure that you know that in this space, this time is for you. You can get back to whatever you need to do today very soon. But again, we're going to just land here nice and soft. So close your eyes if you feel comfortable doing so. Go ahead and inhale through your nose. Hold it at the top and just exhale out your mouth. Wonderful. Let's first acknowledge grief, right? It's a little bit different for everyone, but I love this definition from Doctors Haley and Williams of what's your grief. They say, grief is an ongoing and evolving, normal and natural human response to a loss. And so that means that you can grieve the loss of anything that is significant to you. Grief shows up in many different ways. Maybe you lost someone you love. Maybe you lost an animal that you love. Maybe it was a job or an identity. Maybe you feel recently like you've lost a sense of safety or a worldview. All of that can activate grief within us. And I do think that a lot of us are experiencing collective grief in this moment. So again, that loss can take many forms. And it's really important to know that no two people grieve the exact same way. Grief does not follow a timeline, nor does it follow a set of stages. I'm sure you, like everybody else, has heard of the 5 stages of grief. A, those are not sequential, and B, that research was actually only done on a small cohort of people who had been diagnosed with a terminal illness. So that research was really only specifically looking at how those people processed that news. And we know now, again, like you might feel the emotions that are associated with each of those 5 stages, but grief is a very unique and non-linear process. And there are actually many different types of grief, at least 7. There's anticipatory grief, cumulative, sometimes called compound grief. There is ambiguous loss, non-finite grief, delayed or absent grief, traumatic grief, and then there's the grief that I focus on a lot in my work with people, which is disenfranchised grief. So Kenneth Doka or Doka has a great definition of disenfranchised grief, which is when society denies a person's need, right, role, or capacity to grieve. So disenfranchised grief can occur when society says that a relationship isn't important. I think the most prevalent example of this is if you lose an animal or a pet. That seems to be not as important as anything else. But if you've lost a pet, you know how much that hurts. And I was an animal trainer for a decade before I got into this work. So I know firsthand how important and special those relationships with your animals can be. Disenfranchised grief can also occur when the relationship to the person or the death itself is stigmatized by society. So a good example of this is, if someone dies from a drug overdose or, someone dies by suicide. My father did actually die by suicide, and I I will not repeat here some of the just asinine and insensitive things that people said to me and my family at that time. And disenfranchised grief can also occur when the loss itself isn't necessarily recognized as grief worthy because it's not a death. So good examples of this are if someone you love is diagnosed with dementia, infertility and pregnancy loss can qualify under disenfranchised grief. And I do think that, we as a society are getting better at talking about some of these things, but there's still a long way to go in terms of like making space for that. Which kind of brings me to the next point of why on earth is it so hard? Um, I think one of the reasons it's hard to sit with grief is because we all have this kind of ingrained belief that we have to be productive at all costs, especially at work. I love Jenny Odell's book, How to Do Nothing. And she says specifically that nothing is more insidious and harder to resist than the logic of productivity for its own sake. Under this logic, if you are not producing, you are failing. So, to put it simply, our world is not designed for grief processing. Sitting and witnessing and accepting grief is not, or accepting anything, honestly, is not something that companies do very well because that's just not how modern capitalism is designed. Capitalism pushes for growth and production at all costs. I worked in the tech sphere for almost 6 years. And one of the phrases that I hated the most was move fast and break shit because it was never accompanied by any periods of move slow and fix things. You were instead expected to fix the things that were breaking while simultaneously also pushing forward with whatever new things that you had been tasked with. And I think this is why we are seeing so much burnout in the work world right now. There are just no natural ebbs and flows in our work lives, despite that literally being how our brains are designed to operate. And we'll touch more on that a little bit later. So there's this idea that we have to earn breaks instead of the actual real fact that we deserve them. And the fact that you would put guilt on yourself for needing a break or needing some time, that's what is part of keeping the system running, right? If grief is thought of as unproductive, you are, of course, going to feel a lot of conflict when it arises within you. So this is my favorite slide on the whole presentation. We love a chart and we love cute little dumpster fire graphics. So when I first started coaching in 2023, I was actually focused on helping people work through burnout because I myself had cycled in and out of burnout so often in that tech job that I had a lot of tools to teach people and help people through the process with. And then my brother died, and I had to take a step back from everything. But funny enough, so many of the tools that I had been implementing for my own burnout served me really well in my grief. And so that's when I realized that there's this overlapping issue that prevents people from integrating and processing both of these things. And that's capitalism. Like we talked about on the last slide, it is the drive of capitalism to always be moving forward and producing, even at the expense of our own well-being. And so while it's impossible for us ourselves to change how the world operates, what we can do is change how we operate within it. So let's go ahead and dive into some of those tools right now. We'll start out with tools to use at work. Now, I offer these with the caveat that I don't know what your specific team's culture looks like. I don't know the dynamics between you and your manager. So take what you feel will work with you in your situation and leave what doesn't, because you know you best. And almost all of the tools that I will share here are from Brene Brown's first leadership book, Dare to Lead, because that's the leadership style that I'm trained in. So first, communication, a big one. In her latest interview with the New York Times, Brene Brown says that effective communication is about using the right words to describe what we do, what we mean, and what we need. I love Brene's work because it really centers our humanity in everything that we do. So let's talk about how we can bring some of that into the workspace. So first is being as vulnerable as you safely can. That is going to give people context into what's going on, and it helps build relationship. Now, I will say that vulnerability is not disclosure. It's not oversharing. You share parts of you with the people who she says have earned the right to hear your story. And it is very real that some parts of people's identities are not safe at work. It's really important that we acknowledge that. But vulnerability is what begets trust. Most people think it's the other way around, that I have to trust you before I can be vulnerable with you. But again, it's the opposite. How someone holds those small moments of vulnerability shows you how they can be trusted. The other important thing about communication is to be reliable and take accountability. Reliability is basically doing what you'll say you'll do. So at work, this means staying aware of your competencies and limitations so that you're not overpromising. And that means you're able to deliver on your commitments and balance competing priorities that come up. And then accountability is very simple. You just own your mistakes, apologize, and make amends. Although that's probably easier said than done. And then another tool for communication is being generous and extending the most generous interpretation to someone's intentions, words, and actions. I have just found that it just makes life easier when you assume that people are trying their best. And that is what you would want someone to do with you, right? To assume that you're doing your best. But again, we should also remember that Maya Angelou quote, which is when someone shows you who they are the first time, believe them. So again, being as vulnerable, communicating as well as you can, as safely as you can. Okay, so it's important to communicate in ways that don't put people onto the defensive. And I will say that I don't necessarily think it's fair that anyone who is grieving should be expected to be the one concerned about communicating. But, frankly, not enough people, not enough managers have done the work around that. And the world is just riddled with awful communicators. So we're going to do what we can to communicate well, because again, it will make our lives easier. So here are a few ways that Brene Brown suggests starting really tough conversations. The story that I'm telling myself, I love this one because it kind of separates the two people from their own perspectives on things. So a great example is like the story that I'm telling myself is that you pulled this client from me because you don't think that I'm doing a good enough job. And that gives the other person the chance to say, oh, no, I pulled that client because we have this new hire and they're still getting ramped up and they need to get some experience under their belt. So that's why it happened. It allows people to kind of level set each other's perspectives. Another really good one is just saying, that's not my experience with so and so. That's not my experience with that part of the product. That's a great way to say something in terms of your experience without saying you are wrong about something. So again, it's not putting anybody on the defensive. Another great phrase, I'm working from these assumptions. What about you? So I am working from the assumption that you would like this meeting with the new executive to be a casual sort of like coffee chat. And that gives the other person the opportunity to say, oh, no, I was working under the assumption that you were going to make a slide deck for this and it was going to be a more formal presentation. Other phrases, help me understand, I'm curious about, tell me more about this, walk me through why you chose this, or even tell me why this doesn't fit or this doesn't work with you. You'll notice that most of these phrases lead with curiosity. Because when you lead with curiosity, you are a little bit more open in what you might get back in terms of the conversation. And it helps things stay moving in a way that, again, nobody's kind of armoring up or getting defensive about anything. So another tool to use at work is boundaries. And oh boy, boundaries are a meaty thing to sink your teeth into, right? Prentice Hemphill has this wonderful definition. They say that boundaries are the distance at which I can love you and me simultaneously. So if we modify that and take some liberties and turn that into something that can be used in the work world, we might say boundaries are the distance at which you can care about yourself and care about your work at the same time. And boundaries are very simple in theory. It's what's okay versus not okay, but they are hard to put into practice. So, Brene uses the example of pulling someone inside and saying like, hey, like it is okay to be frustrated about this, project not getting off the table. What's not okay is for you to slam your fists on the table and walk out of the meeting room. Again, what's okay, what's not okay. And again, clear communication is going to be key when establishing those boundaries. I like to think of boundaries as if-then statements. And that's a framework that I kind of coach people through in my one-on-one work. And I also usually suggest starting with gratitude, just because it's nice to acknowledge when someone thinks that you're capable of doing something. So an example of this if-then framework is, thank you for considering me. If you would like me to take on this new client, then I won't be able to finish the quarterly report in time for that next meeting. Which would you like me to prioritize? You're very clearly stating your capacity, what you can do, what you can't do, and then you're also opening the door for a conversation of what this other person wants to prioritize so that you can get clarity. Because as Brene also says, clear is kind. Okay, so we touched a little bit on tools to use at work. Work is kind of complicated because it's literally complicated. There are so many moving parts and people that you're interacting with and systems. And so you really only have a certain level of control in terms of what happens at work, but you have much more control over yourself and what you can do to help yourself. So we're going to spend more time digging into these types of tools because you can implement them whenever you need. Grief is an emotion that's defined by not knowing what to do, and that is totally okay. And so these are things that I have found helpful for myself, and they have also been backed by research because that's really important to me personally. If I am in the depths of my grief, I'm not really in the mood to just like throw spaghetti at a wall and see what sticks. I want to know what has worked so that I can implement it for myself. So the first and probably what I would maybe most important thing is learning how to complete stress cycles. So stress is a normal and very real part of your brain chemistry. And it was developed as part of that animal evolutionary need to fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. Most people have heard of fight or flight, but two other responses have been added: freeze, which is pretty self-explanatory, and then fawn. Fawn is when you or when someone works to appease the aggressor. So a great example of this is, like, if my dog's at the dog park and another dog gets in his face, he will go down on the ground and roll belly up and say, I am not a threat. Please don't hurt me. That's a great example of a fawn response, but humans will do that fawn response too. So stress is the neurobiological shift. We're about to get really sciencey, but stick with me. Stress is the neurobiological shift that happens inside your body when you encounter a threat. So think the adrenaline and the cortisol pumping through your system, the limbic system, that primal part of your brain, that takes over and your digestion slows. Every organ in your body responds to this. And we don't typically face actual predators anymore, but our brain continues to respond to any stress in that exact same way. So these processes ideally were closed loops that helped us, process the emotion of a real actual threat. So like you see a saber-toothed tiger, you run away from the saber-toothed tiger, and your body says, oh, I ran away. I must be safe now. And it allows you to kind of close that loop. We don't typically, like I said, we don't face those predators anymore, but our brain will respond the same way. So like nowadays, while we don't have to be worried about running away from a saber-toothed tiger, we have different stressors. We have different things that cause us the stress. And today, a lot of times it's not stuff that we can really get away from. So like getting stuck in traffic, in-laws, project deadlines. These are a few of potential stressors that we encounter all the time. And so it's also important to note that just because you've dealt with a stressor, like say you find an alternate route on the way to the office that doesn't have traffic, that does not mean that you have dealt with the stress itself, including the stress that is living in your body. So if you don't close that loop, if your brain thinks that the threat has not passed, then it's going to assume that you're still in danger. The cycle is going to continue, and it might result in more stress, in exhaustion, potentially even burnout. There we go. Okay, so let's talk about the polyvagal theory. The word polyvagal refers to the vagus nerve, which is a major nerve that runs from the brain all the way down to the gut. And you can see in this image here that it connects every major organ in our bodies to the brain. And so again, stress is a response that is automatic, and it's that part of our nervous system that regulates involuntary functions. So think breathing, heartbeats, etc. And that's called the autonomic nervous system. And this system uses what's called neuroception to assess our environment and immediately categorize everything we see as safe or not safe. And this happens completely outside of our conscious awareness. So when our situation is deemed safe, our system is in a parasympathetic state. That's the science talk for, you might have heard, rest and digest. And in this state, our brain is what's going to receive the majority of our resources for higher executive functioning. But when the stress response is activated, our vagus nerve sends signals through our sympathetic nervous system, and we subconsciously enter that fight, flight, freeze, or fawn mode. And so constant stress, as you can see, it's going to affect every system in our bodies. But fortunately, there are things that we can do to improve what's called our vagal tone. And that's going to help bring our bodies back into that parasympathetic state, that rest and digest. So by regulating our physical body through sleep or breath work or play or movement, we can send signals to our brain via that vagus nerve that we are okay. So there are 7 concrete ways that you can complete a stress response cycle. One is physical activity. That's probably the most self-explanatory, right? Like you see the bear, you run from the bear. The running tells your body like, okay, we are running away from the threat. We can close that loop. Breathing is another one that I really love just because that is something that you can do literally anywhere. You can access that tool at any time. And if you're taking those slow, deep, conscious breaths, again, it's signaling to your brain like, okay, well, I'm taking slow, calm breaths. I guess I'm fine. Um, a couple other things like positive social interaction can actually close a stress response. Even just like a chat a pleasant chat with someone behind you at the grocery store. Like that that creates connections that closes a stress response cycle. Laughter, really, really good. Affection, physical affection. Number six, having a good cry. I know that we live in a society that is kind of like, don't cry, suck it up, move on. But like, there's literally cortisone in your tears. That's the stress hormone. So when you are crying, you are literally expelling stress from your body. There's there's nothing like a good cry. And then number seven, creative expression. Humans are creative beings. So to create for creation's sake is something that can complete a stress response cycle, not create so that you can sell. Remember, we're trying to slowly pull out of the system, the oppressive system of capitalism, wherever we can. Not everything has to be monetized. Sometimes we just want to create because it's fun to do so. Now, you'll notice that sleep isn't actually on this list. And that's because sleep doesn't actually complete a stress response cycle. But what it does do is it sets your body up to better close those loops when it's awake. And it is vitally important for processing grief. So that brings us to the next tool, which is rest and be still. This quote from Tricia Hersey, I love it so much. It's from her book, Rest is Resistance. She says, your mind is a space that needs silence, space to process what it is feeling without the participation of others. Your mind needs space to process what it is feeling without the participation of others. When I tell you I felt personally victimized by Regina George when I read that sentence, because I like to have the participation of others, but stillness is really important, especially when sitting in grief. And if you want to figure out how to just like move on from your grief and finish grieving, I will tell you right now, I am not the coach for you because personally, I don't believe that that's possible. Grief never finishes. All it does is integrate. And I really believe that grief needs to be witnessed. Like you need to sit with it. And that is really scary and really intimidating to do that alone. So again, that's why I walk with people through their grief journeys so that they know that they are not alone in this. And if the idea of rest activates a stress response in you, like that's okay, right? Tricia Hersey's book is a really great starting point. She talks about how her own grief awakened her to the importance of rest. And so, yeah, we can argue that mourning is an act of resistance. Like to fully grieve is is to reject the dehumanizing aspects of the exploitative systems that we live within, and it allows you to honor what that system is disregarding. And I know that it is so hard to find the time to do that. Like I have been there. I developed like a three-part framework for myself, and I still use it to this day, where I could implement like very purposeful space and stillness, but it was in less than 15 minutes because I was in the depths of grieving my brother, and even though I absolutely did not want to get out of bed, I had to just like get myself together in time for that 8 a.m. meeting. So that guide is actually free to download on my website. And actually, like, you know what, I will literally just send that out to anybody who registered for this webinar along with the recording. So you'll get that too. Okay. Rest and be still. Again, rest matters because you matter. So doctors Emily and Amelia Nagoski have a whole section on rest in their book Burnout. But here are just a few takeaways. The most important one is that mental rest is just as necessary for your brain to process the world as physical rest. It is a basic physiological need. Human beings are built to oscillate between work and rest. You do a little bit of a task, you take a break. But again, there's no ebb and flow in our work days anymore. So we have to kind of create that ourselves. And studies show that on average, your body and your brain literally need to to spend about 42% of your day doing some type of resting. So I think 10 out of 24 hours. And I know that that can sound like a lot, and some days it is. Some days that will not be realistic. So zooming out a little bit and thinking like, okay, how can I add more pockets of rest in my day so that on average, about 42% of my time is spent in either that physical or mental rest mode. And if 42% sounds like a lot, try and remember that the other 58% of your time, if you have rested, you're going to be more energized, you're going to be more focused, you're going to be more creative, and frankly, you're going to be more pleasant to be around because I don't know about you, but when I'm tired, I am mean. So this is important, right? Like rest is a racial justice issue. It is a gender issue. It is a class issue. And like more broadly, rest is a general public health issue, right? Like you hear those phrases like, I'll sleep when I'm dead, you know, uh, get up and grind, like hustle culture, all of that stuff. So within exploitative systems, to rest is to literally be a part of that resistance. And Trisha Hersey talks in her book of just like bringing this like trickster energy to it. Like, where can you just like steal back 10 minutes of your time just to kind of like fight the system from within? Next up, it's really important in your grief to connect to something bigger. Having a sense of purpose, meaning, and perspective in our lives allows us to develop understanding and move forward. That's from Brene Brown's book, The Gifts of Imperfection. I call that a starter book because it's, if you haven't done any of Brene's work yet, that is a great place to start out. But if you want to be more resilient, you have to connect to something bigger than yourself. And there is research to back this up. So grief is an exercise in resilience, and resilience is defined as the ability to overcome adversity or difficulty. Not to say that we need to like overcome grief itself, but grief does involve varying degrees of difficult things. So the foundation of resilience is actually spirituality, which is the belief in connection, a power greater than yourself, and interconnections that are grounded in love and compassion. And please know that this does not mean that you have to be religious in any way, shape, or form. Like nature can just as easily represent a power greater than yourself while also reminding you how interconnected you are. So, spirituality also informs three other key functions of resilience: cultivating hope, practicing critical awareness, and letting go of taking the edge off, sometimes called numbing. So, number one, cultivating hope. Researcher C.R. Snyder has actually determined that hope is not an emotion, it is a cognitive process that you can learn. I am like kind of obsessed with this concept right now, and it's probably going to be the subject of my next webinar. But like the idea of hope being a learned behavior is so exciting to me. It fills me with hope. So that involves three components, and I work with my one-on-one clients on this a lot. So those three components of cultivating hope are setting realistic goals, staying flexible when working to achieve those goals, and believing in your ability to achieve those goals. So again, I work with my one-on-one clients all the time on this. Can we set a realistic goal? Can you believe in yourself, which you should believe in yourself because the goal we set was realistic? And then how flexible can you be with yourself while you work to achieve the goals? Number two, practicing critical awareness. This is so important in terms of resilience. We exist in a world that is always trying to sell us things, right? Like hashtag capitalism. Researcher Jean Kilbore estimates that we see over 3,000 ads a day. But I like that was even before TikTok was a thing, I'm pretty sure. That research was done a little while ago. So like who knows what that is now. And even now the lines between like content and advertising are really blurred. So we have to know how to reality check what we're seeing. Because when we can kind of take a step back and think like, who would benefit from me seeing this thing or feeling bad about myself? We can again kind of extract ourselves from that system that says like, oh, are you sad? Just buy this thing and you'll feel better. Like, don't do anything else, just buy the thing. Um, and then number three, letting go of numbing. I will say there are times when I believe that numbing is appropriate, but I can only decide that for myself, and you can only decide that for yourself. I use a lot of like wave and ocean and water metaphors in grief, but like, say that you are having a really big moment of grief and it's a whirlpool and it's just sucking you down deeper and deeper. Well, if you have a little pony bottle of oxygen that you can sip on, that'll help get you to the surface, like why would you not use it, right? So like if I'm having a really big moment of overwhelm and grief, like yeah, I might grab my phone and I might look up videos of puppies or like baby cows. Um, I might use that as a tool to bring me back to a baseline. The problem becomes like if you're using that not to come to a baseline, but to like not feel the baseline at all, to not feel anything at all. So an emotion is one thing and there's two sides to a coin, right? But it is a coin. So it's the same thing with an emotion. There are, yes, things that we might deem positive emotions. There are also things that we might say are negative emotions, but they are all just emotions. That's all. And so the research shows that when you numb the negative emotions, you're also numbing the positive emotions too. It is not selective. And as Dr. Brown says, when we lose our tolerance for discomfort, we lose joy. So that kind of brings me into the last tool that you can use on a personal level, and that's simply to just give yourself some grace. You know, grief is not like work. You can't delegate it, you can't deprioritize it. And there will be days when you feel like you can't do anything right. And that is normal. That is okay. Just remember to keep being nice to yourself. And I reference this quote from the Nagoski sisters all the time. When you are cruel to yourself, contemptuous and shaming, you only increase the cruelty in the world. Being compassionate to yourself is both the least you can do and the single most important thing you can do to make the world a better place. I'm going to let that land because I think that it's really, really important to consider. If you want to make the world a better place, the easiest and most important thing you can do is to be kind to yourself. So with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. I want to thank you all so much for joining me today. I hope you found this helpful and supportive. The recording and also that 15-minute grief guide, they're going to be sent out later this week for you to go back and reference. If you are ready for more, I do have a podcast that I launched this year called Literally Working Through It. You can find it on Spotify, Apple, Substack. I'm pretty sure it's on YouTube Music now too. This podcast explores how we integrate our grief while still surviving within the extractive systems that we live within. You can also connect with me on socials. I'm at Literally Working Through It on Facebook, Threads, Instagram, and Substack. And then finally, I am offering a free support session to anyone who signed up for this webinar. So just scan that QR code. That'll take you straight to my calendar and you can book a time to connect with me. And if you don't see a time that works with you, that's fine. Just connect via email or through the socials and we will find a time that works. Because again, I believe that these tools, this processing, there should be equitable access. So everybody who's on this webinar, who signed up, you're going to get a free session from me. And again, I'll also send out the sources that I cited. Other than that, I want to thank you all so much for being here. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. We're ending a little bit early. I did do that on purpose because I want to make sure that you have some time to do whatever it is you need to do to process everything that was said here and give yourself a little bit of that grace. So again, thank you all so much. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you later.